My name is Hannah. I'm 32 years old, and until 2 months ago, I genuinely believed my boyfriend respected me. I didn't realize how wrong I was until he said it out loud, casually, almost kindly, while driving us to a dinner party he'd been chasing for months. Just try not to embarrass me tonight, he said, eyes fixed on the road. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, these people are way above your level. The words didn't land all at once. They came in stages, first confusion, then heat, then something colder and heavier that settled behind my ribs. I didn't answer him. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I suddenly understood that anything I said would make it worse. For me. The car kept moving. The city faded into tree-lined streets, then into gates and long driveways. He filled the silence with nervous chatter. Who might be there? Which investors mattered? How this night could change everything. For him, it already had. We'd been together 18 months. Long enough to know each other's routines, long enough to recognize patterns, long enough for silence to mean more than affection. He worked in corporate communications for a fast-growing tech startup, always networking, always climbing, always calculating who mattered and who didn't. I used to admire that drive. I told myself ambition was attractive. He came from comfort, private schools, country club summers, parents who treated money like air, not obscene wealth. Just enough to never worry. I grew up middle class in Ohio. Public schools, scholarships, part-time jobs. I learned early how to be invisible and competent at the same time. My work isn't flashy. I consult companies on sustainable development and environmental impact reduction. It's technical, long-term, and inconvenient. Most people lose interest halfway through my first sentence. But I'm good at it, and I've built a reputation quietly, carefully, over the last decade. He knew what I did. He just never cared to know why it mattered. At his events, he'd introduce me as Hannah, she does environmental stuff, then smoothly redirect the conversation. I noticed. I just told myself it wasn't intentional. The invitation had come from Richard and Patricia Carrington, names that made my boyfriend visibly tense for weeks. Richard was a venture capitalist. Patricia sat on multiple nonprofit boards. Their dinner parties were legendary in his world. He bought a new suit, practiced handshakes, rehearsed conversation starters in the mirror. I wore a dress I already owned. The day of the event, when I stepped out of the bedroom, he looked me up and down with an expression I hadn't seen before, disappointment layered over resignation. "That's what you're wearing?" he asked. "It fits the dress code," I said. He sighed. "It's fine, never mind." We got in the car. 10 minutes into the drive, he turned down the music and said it, the sentence that would replay in my head for weeks. "Just smile. Be polite. Let me handle the conversations." I stared out the window after that, watched the sky darken, counted streetlights. What he didn't know, what I hadn't told him, was that Richard Carrington had personally invited me. 3 weeks earlier, his firm had reached out about pivoting towards sustainable investing. Someone had recommended my work. We'd spoken twice, met over video. He'd read my proposal carefully. This dinner wasn't just networking. It was business. I hadn't told my boyfriend because the project wasn't finalized, and because he'd never shown interest before. I didn't want to explain something to someone who only listened when it benefited them. We pulled into the Carrington estate at 6:45 p.m. Valet parking, manicured lawns, soft lights glowing through massive windows. He checked his reflection one last time and looked at me. "Remember what I said?" I nodded, and followed him inside, already knowing this night would end something, one way or another. The terrace buzzed with low laughter and the soft clink of glasses. About 30 people stood in loose clusters, dressed in understated wealth, linen jackets, watches that didn't flash, but probably cost more than my car. I felt my boyfriend subtly shift beside me, shoulders back, jaw set. This was his battlefield. I scanned the crowd once and saw Richard Carrington immediately. He was taller than I remembered from the screen, silver hair neatly combed back, standing near the bar in conversation with a small group. Our eyes met. Eyes. His face lit up. He excused himself mid-sentence and walked straight toward us. My boyfriend straightened instantly, that practiced networking smile snapping into place. He stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Carrington, thank you so much for having us." Richard walked right past him, past the outstretched hand, and took mine. "Hannah," he said warmly, shaking my hand with both of his. "Finally. We've been waiting to meet you in person. Patricia's been talking about your proposal all week." For a split second, the world went very quiet. I felt it before I saw it, the way my boyfriend's body went rigid beside me. When I turned my head, his hand was still hanging in the air, fingers slowly curling inward as he lowered it. "Oh, yes," I said evenly. "It's great to finally meet you too. Thank you for the invitation." "Are you kidding?" Richard laughed. "Having you here is the whole point of tonight. Well, one of the points." Only then did he seem to notice the man standing next to me. "And you must be—" He glanced between us. "My boyfriend," I said, calm, neutral. "Of course," Richard said politely, shaking his hand this time. "Lovely to meet you." My boyfriend nodded a little too fast. "Likewise." "And Patricia will be thrilled," Richard continued, already turning his attention back to me. "She had about a dozen questions about your carbon offset modeling. I told her she'd have to wait until tonight." I watched color drain from my boyfriend's face. You two know each other?" he asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Oh, we've been in talks for a few weeks," Richard said easily. "We're hoping to bring Hannah on as lead consultant for our sustainable investment initiative. Her reputation in the field is stellar. Frankly, we're lucky she's even considering us." Silence stretched. My boyfriend laughed once, too loud, too sharp. "She didn't mention that." Richard smiled. "She's modest. Refreshing these days." He clapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Come on, let me introduce you to Patricia and a few others." Then, as an afterthought, "Feel free to grab a drink and mingle. Dinner will be out shortly." And just like that, he guided me away. I glanced back once. My boyfriend was still standing where Richard had left him, holding his jacket lapel like he needed something solid to keep him upright. The rest of the evening felt unreal. Richard introduced me to person after person: investors, board members, fund managers. Almost all of them already knew my name. Some had read my work, a few had questions ready. Patricia Carrington cornered me for nearly 20 minutes, asking pointed, intelligent questions about ESG, compliance, and long-term yield modeling. I answered easily, the way I always did, grounded, precise, unflashy. Across the terrace, I saw my boyfriend drifting closer and closer, hovering at my side whenever another woman spoke to me, laughing a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. His hand kept finding my arm, possessive, as if proximity could restore something he'd lost. 2 hours earlier, I'd been a liability. Now I was an asset. At dinner, a formal sit-down with assigned seating, I found myself placed between Patricia and a green energy CEO named Daniel. My boyfriend sat 4 seats down next to someone's husband who worked in insurance. I could see him craning his neck, straining to hear my conversations. After dessert, Richard stood and tapped his glass. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Patricia and I are excited to announce some changes in how we approach our investments, placing greater focus on sustainability and long-term environmental impact. We've been fortunate to connect with Hannah Wright, who many of you have met tonight. She'll be helping guide this transition, and we hope some of you may be interested in similar initiatives." Polite applause filled the terrace. I didn't look at my boyfriend. I didn't need to. The drive home was silent. 15 minutes passed before he spoke. "Why didn't you tell me you knew Richard Carrington?" I kept my eyes forward. "You never asked about my work." "That's not fair." "It's accurate." He swallowed. "I'm sorry about what I said earlier. I was nervous. It came out wrong." I turned then, looked at him fully. "It came out honest." He didn't reply. And somewhere between the estate gates and the city lights, I understood that no amount of apology could undo what had already been revealed. We didn't break up that night. But something fundamental fractured on that drive home, something that didn't shatter loudly, just split cleanly, like a fault line finally giving way after years of pressure. The next morning, my boyfriend woke up different, suddenly attentive, suddenly curious. Over coffee, he asked questions about my work, real questions this time, who else I consulted for, what the Carrington project involved, how big it might become. His tone was careful, almost reverent, like he was handling something newly valuable. I answered politely, briefly. Inside, I felt oddly hollow. By midweek, he'd asked if he could sit in on one of my calls, just to understand better. He started suggesting conferences we could attend together, places he'd never shown interest in before. He forwarded me articles about sustainable investing, underlining sections like he was studying for an exam. It felt less like support and more like damage control. A week later, we went to a happy hour with his coworkers. People who had barely acknowledged me before suddenly wanted my opinion. I received LinkedIn requests before we even left the bar. He introduced me differently now. "This is Hannah," he'd say, voice proud. "She's a sustainability consultant working with some major firms." He always mentioned the Carringtons. Always. 2 weeks after the dinner party, we were at his apartment making dinner when he mentioned an upcoming industry conference. "Richard's speaking," he said casually. "We should go." "I'm not planning to attend," I replied. He paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "Why not? It's a great opportunity." "For you or for me?" His eyes snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're using my connection to Richard to advance your career." "That's not fair," he said quickly. "I'm just trying to be supportive." "You weren't supportive before." I apologized. "You apologized after you realized I was useful." Silence filled the kitchen, thick and sharp. "I didn't know," he said finally. "If I'd known how important your work was." "That's the problem," I interrupted. "It was important before you knew." His face tightened. "Why are you doing this? I said I was sorry. What more do you want?" I set the knife down carefully. "I want you to respect me when I'm not impressive to your friends, when I'm not connected, when I'm just me." He didn't answer, because he couldn't. That night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling and understood something with brutal clarity. His respect had conditions. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. After that fight, the air between us changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. It thinned. Conversations became careful. Affection felt rehearsed. Every compliment he gave me seemed to carry an invisible footnote. This matters now. He started looping me into conversations that had nothing to do with us and everything to do with positioning. At dinners with his colleagues, he'd angle his chair so I was visible. At events, he'd introduce me early, almost eagerly, as if afraid someone else might claim me first. Once, at a fundraiser, a woman asked him how we'd met. He laughed and said, "I got lucky." It sounded like a joke. It didn't feel like one. The final confrontation came quietly. We were sitting on his couch one Sunday afternoon, half watching a documentary I'd picked. He checked his phone, frowned slightly, then looked at me. "Richard's assistant asked if we'd be interested in dinner next week, just the four of us." "We?" I asked. He hesitated. "I assumed." "You assumed you were included." "Well, yes." I studied him, really studied him. The tension in his jaw, the calculation behind his eyes. "This," I said softly, "is exactly what I'm talking about." He sighed, frustrated. "Why are you making everything a problem?" "Because you're not loving me," I replied. "You're leveraging me." "That's not true." "It is. You didn't want me to speak at that dinner. You told me not to embarrass you, and now you want front row access to the life you thought wasn't worth listening to." His voice rose. "I was wrong. I admitted that. You were wrong about my value, not about your attitude toward it." He stood up, pacing. "You're punishing me." "I'm observing you." He stopped. "So what, you're just going to throw this away?" I took a breath. "You threw it away the moment you decided respect was conditional." The breakup didn't happen that day, but it started there. 3 weeks after the Carrington dinner, I ended it. Calmly, clearly, no raised voices, no dramatics. He accused me of holding a grudge, of being unforgiving, of leaving just as things were getting good. I didn't argue, because the truth was simpler and harder to hear. I didn't want to be with someone who had to learn to respect me. The quiet after the breakup was louder than I expected. No messages, no apologies arriving at midnight, no sudden interest in my schedule. Just space, clean and unsettling, and eventually peaceful. A month later, I ran into Richard Carrington at a downtown lunch meeting. He greeted me warmly, then paused. "How's your boyfriend?" he asked. "We ended things," I said. He nodded once. "I'm sorry to hear that. For what it's worth, Patricia didn't think he was right for you." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "She said he seemed more interested in who you knew than who you were." Richard smiled faintly. "She's very good at reading people." The Carrington project expanded quickly after that. New clients, bigger scope. I hired an assistant, moved offices. The work grew, but it never consumed me. 6 weeks ago, I saw my ex at another professional event. He was with someone new, well-dressed, attentive, already scanning the room. When our eyes met, I saw surprise, then something like regret. I nodded politely and turned away. Later that night, he texted me. "I've been thinking a lot. I really did learn from what happened. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate you when I had the chance." I didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say. I've been dating someone new for about a month now. His name is Thomas. He teaches middle school science. He thinks my work is fascinating because it helps the world his students will inherit. When he introduces me, he says, "This is Hannah. She's incredible." Not useful, not impressive, just me. Sometimes I think about that car ride, about being told I was beneath someone else's world. At the time, it hurt. Now I see it as clarity. You can't build a life with someone who only values you when you're useful. I'm grateful I learned that at 34, and not decades later, trapped in something built on conditional respect. Some moments don't break you. They reveal you.